and welcome to our daily word this morning. Glad you could join me for our time together again on this Thursday morning as we continue our journey through Scripture and our daily word and how it speaks to us. As always, I'm grateful that you could join me for our time together and that you would carve out time to be with me as we share our lives together. So we have reached almost the end of another week, and it's a beautiful morning this morning as we share together. So I have chosen for this morning for our daily word number 796. Hard to believe that next week we'll be at 800. For our daily word this morning, it is from the book of Philippians chapter 4. And we hear these words. Now, Paul, it's interesting how he writes these words to us, and we're actually going to hear from the scripture on Sunday morning how he writes these words to us and gives us an idea, I think a good idea, about how we're called to live and what this means for us. So he says these words to us: "Rejoice in the Lord always, and let your gentleness be known. Do not worry, but let your request be known to God. And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds." So it's been said, and I read this just the other day, but it's been said that there are two kinds of Christians in this world. There are gloomy Christians and there are joyful Christians. Interesting perspective that someone wrote. There are gloomy Christians and there are joyful Christians. Now, for Paul, joy, rejoicing, is at the end of it, after all. He says to us that astonishment and joy are what our faith finally points to. That even the gloomiest of Christians, if we would put ourselves in that case, could find a way in our lives to rejoice. Now we know Paul, right? Paul, who has had 40 lashes minus one, shipwrecks, licking his wounds in a Roman jail cell, all of that, all this difficulty that Paul went through in his life, writes these words: "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice." But he writes it kind of at the end, kind of as the post way of dealing with life. Rejoice, it seems, is the last word that can only be spoken after the first word is spoken. It's this word that reminds us that through it all, when we don't have a roof over our heads, when it seems we've been abandoned, when life is the most difficult, that this word rejoice is the only word that answers everything else. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to everyone. Don't worry. Let your requests be known to God. And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds. It's such an interesting perspective of how we're called to live our lives and what it is that in our lives, how we respond to all the situations in our lives. Rejoice. Let our gentleness be known. And we're going to hear about this particular text on Sunday. I think there's such important words that we hear, that we're called to live our lives in that kind of way. Even in the midst of difficulty, we're supposed to come back to rejoicing. even when life is the hardest and we face these unknown futures, we're supposed to come back to rejoicing. And not just rejoicing, but then letting our gentleness be known. And I think, we all find those difficult things to do, but it's really, really what God has called us to in our lives. So I've been in conversation with folks the last couple of days with life's struggles and the unknowns, and it's difficult. And then I'm preparing tonight for senior night for soccer, and this weekend another wedding to officiate. And on the other side of the difficulties of life, there are these high point moments where we find ourselves, and I have to wrestle with all of it. I wrestle with helping folks try to see light at the end of the tunnel, and then rejoicing with folks in the celebration of a marriage, and how exciting that is, and this simple reminder for us, in all of our lives, that we should rejoice and let our gentleness be known. And that importantly, God will guard our hearts and our minds. And if we can live that way, if we can struggle through life in that way, if we can face life in that way, we'll find joy in the midst of the difficulties. So, two kinds of Christians maybe, gloomy ones and joyful ones. I pray that we would choose to be the joyful ones, and then let our gentleness be known to everyone. That's our word for today. Thanks for joining me for our time together. Thanks for being with me. As always, know of God's love that surrounds you. Know of my love for you. And I'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Have a great day.